Dr. Lisa Benton-Short is an associate professor of geography at the George Washington University. She runs the university's sustainability initiatives, and she's an expert on urban sustainability. Recently released the second edition of her book, Cities and Nature, and she's here with us today to give us a look at where we are on turning our cities green. Lisa, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
So, my first question, there's obviously a lot we need to do with our cities to get them where they need to be. But in your book, you talked about some good things we've done already. So my big question is, how are we doing, starting with DC?
How are we doing? Well, you know, cities are a complex microcosm of sustainability itself. And I think, you know, if we really want to get to a sustainable future, we have to understand the many dimensions that cities are going to face with regard to moving towards sustainability. And I think if I were to give DC a grade, I would say it has a B+ for its vision about how DC can be eventually a sustainable city. A vision isn't just one.
What about today, though?
What about today? Well, I don't think DC can count itself as the greenest city in the United States, and most US cities are not the greenest cities in the world. There are other cities, particularly in Europe, that have much more progressive examples in place of moving to sustainability.
There seems to be kind of an overall public perception here that green is going to mean, you know, big, wide open spaces. A lot of people seem to think that green is going to be rural, it's going to be exurban, and, you know, everything I've been reading, including your book, says that's pretty much dead wrong. That the real greening is in the density of cities, if done correctly. So why is that perception there?
You know, it's interesting. As an urban scholar, I've wrestled with a long history of we love cities and we hate them. We see them as the equivalent of man's shining beacon on the hill and all that they are in terms of creative constructions of human design. At the same time, we also attribute them to chaos and crime and everything that's amoral. So we have a curious love-hate relationship with our cities, and I think it underscores a bit of a bias against cities in our own cultural thinking. And I think that is part of the reason why we don't look at cities and see them for the potential they have to create and implement sustainability. It's why we think that or at least some people think, that the answer is to return to lower density living. I don't think that's possible for many reasons, one of which is we're going to be a planet of 9 billion by 2050, so I'm not sure you can, you know, count on decreasing population and decreasing density.
Even if we could, though, would that be the answer?
No, it wouldn't be the answer. I don't think everybody wants to go back to farming their own plots of land and living on subsistence agriculture. I think the promise of cities is the promise of kind of the merging of innovations in technology and our ability to harness our imagination and rethink the way that we have cities. So I look at cities and I look at campuses and cities as kind of the vanguards of how we're going to get to sustainability.
So this is essentially the lab now. This is kind of the living lab.
I think we're a living lab. I think you know, a campus like GW has tremendous promise to work in partnership with, you know, the District of Columbia and the metropolitan area and say, all right, what kinds of pilot programs can we do that might be campus-based, but, you know, we're a campus of 17,000 people. And, you know, if we can make it work on the small scale, can we upscale it to the size of the city?
Now, a lot of the kids that are going to be, you know, in your program, participating in programs here on campus to look at this as a green kind of living lab, a lot of them, though, are going to be going, you know, on breaks and stuff back to the suburbs for, you know, break to see their family. And there seems to, amongst the middle class and the upper middle class, still be a real love affair with the suburbs. You know, it's very much tied to the notion of the American dream and, you know, having your own big house and everything. What can we do to kind of talk people down from that?
Well, that's the great cultural transition that has to happen. And, you know, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have said, wow, that is a huge obstacle to try and get people. Part of it is our love affair with the automobile, right? And you think about all the movies where people are unhappy and they just get off in the car and drive, and somehow at the end of the movie they might be a little bit happier. You know, that notion
It doesn't
of
seem to work the same with a scooter or anything.
no, the scooter and the skateboard doesn't, you know, really quite, you know, you can only go so far. I think that the suburbs were predicated on low-cost fossil fuels. And I think what we have had since 2005 or 2006 is really rising energy costs, particularly around gasoline. And that has made a cultural transition possible in that we've seen the sales of large, say, SUVs decline in recent years in favor of more energy efficient cars. But at the same time, you know, a lot of the friends that I know that live in the suburbs are also questioning, wow, this, you know, the commute is getting longer, the cost of commuting is going up. I wouldn't mind moving back to a place where I have access to public transportation.
So essentially, the circumstances are going to make this change for us.
I think, you know, I think there will always be people that want the large land and want to live, you know, without neighbors nearby. I think we're seeing some really interesting demographic shifts, though. One is that we're seeing more people not have children, and we're seeing more young people wanting to stay in cities. So, you know, and I think partly it's due to cultural influences. So, you know, in the 1990s, as Seinfeld and Friends made living in New York really cool again, we saw young people in their 20s say, I want to live in New York, right? And then since then, we've had Sex in the City, and we've had just a variety of ways in which living in the city is portrayed as a really cool, wonderful experience. So on the one hand, one of the demographic shifts is that, you know, the 20 to 30-something range are choosing to live in the cities, not in the suburbs. And then we're also seeing another demographic shift, and that is people whose children have left, who are, you know, not even in college, post-college, having their own kids. These people are thinking, do I need a 5,400 square foot house? No, let's move back to the city. Let's move, you know, away from the isolation of the suburbs, and let's take advantage of the amenities of the cities. I think that those two demographics are going to continue to demand walkable urban places. You know, places where, you know, you might have to get in the car for some things, but a lot of your day-to-day things don't necessarily have to be in a private automobile.
So it'll essentially be smaller local communities.
I think what we're going to see in cities is what I like to think of as walkable urban villages or walkable urban places.
Now, so we've got human communities. One thing you wrote about in your book that I found very interesting was this notion of biotic communities within the city. You know, we always think of, you know, very biodiverse ecosystems as something that's out in the country, that's out in the woods, and it's out in the jungle. But you're saying in your book that there's essentially these same sorts of ecosystems that just look a little bit different in the cities. Can you explain that a little bit?
I think it goes back to our sense of how we understand cities, and I think kind of maybe a misunderstanding that somehow there's no nature in our cities, there's no environmental ecosystems. In fact, I think nothing can be further from the truth, and I'm not just talking about the obvious green parks and green spaces that we have, but cities can be a wonderful way to show young people all of the elements of environmental science you can do in your backyard and you can do in your neighborhood park. There are tremendous amounts of diversity that we oftentimes overlook. And some of it is simply that, you know, we just have lost our ability, for example, because we've lived in the suburbs or the city for so long, to realize how diverse bird life is, or animal life. Now, it's true that cities are challenged more in that many of our ecosystems are more fragmented, or they're on a smaller scale than, say, they might be out in big wilderness areas. But
they're still there, though.
They're still there. You know, I mean, we have deer in the city. We have squirrels. Some cities, like New York City, are right on the, you know, East Coast flyway of migratory bird populations. And you can actually observe quite a lot of diversity if you know where to look and if you've got the patience.